Do some super duper high-end GTO wizardry analysis across the board. Let's go. All right.
Hello, another day, another DNeggs versus Doug Polk hand here on YouTube. We're going to do some high-end GTO analysis of a awkward pot they played in a single raised pot on an A-side board. So without further ado, let's look at DNeggs' opinion on the hand.
Pair of eights, first hand, we're gonna raise it up. 2.5 big blinds, that's what we do, yo. You could do 2.4, 2.3, all these fucking sizes, whatever. 2.5, keep it simple. All right, we got a pair of eights. We're gonna bet a little bit, just a little bit. 20% pot, and he's raising. What the hell? Come on, bro. All right, ace on the turn, that makes it less likely he's got one, so we ain't going nowhere. You check. I'm gonna put a little bit in there. Bet 4. 4 means 1,600. Each one is, I play in big blinds. It's much easier. All right, jack on the river. Just, what the fuck, man? Check raise jack 4 at ace 9-6 and bang, bang, boom. Okay, such is life. All right, we've got pair 7.
Okay, so it seems that the more DNeggs loses in this challenge, the more aggressively Canadian his commentary gets. But let's have a look at what the solver thinks of the plays here. Obviously, the biggest feature of this hand is Doug's fairly odd, very, very small check raise size here on the dry A-side board. 28.6% of the pot to be exact. So I gave the solver the option of 3 different check raise sizes here to investigate this. So let's have a look at the results. Out of position on the A-side board, Doug should check his range, obviously. And DNeggs follows through with essentially a range C-bet on the A-side board for 20% of the pot. And yeah, you can see the solver really doesn't like the small check raise size on the A-side board. I'm favoring to go for a much larger sizing and constructing like a polarized range on A-side boards. So for value, things like 2-pair and above, not constructing like a merged range where you're raising like A7 here, right? Presumably like you don't want, or there isn't much incentive for a merged check raise range on A-side board because, you know, your marginal good value hands like A7 here don't really benefit from, you know, protection against, you know, random 2 cards or whatever. So these A-side boards, the equilibrium likes 2-pair and above, and then sprinkling in a whole bunch of gut shots with backdoors basically as bluffs, and basically barreling out with a polarized range. So we'll have a look at a different sim where I've given this as the only raise size to see how things differ, but let's entertain this line for a second. So Doug's jack 4 of clubs or whatever. He ends up check raising, which isn't really a thing in this solution, but we'll have a look at Daniel's play. So we have a check raise here, and with 8-8, basically any pair to a check raise on the flop in a heads up game, you're not going to be folding. So easy call. And turn comes the ace of clubs, which basically, as Daniel alluded to, really takes the wind out of Doug's range. Now it's much less likely that he has one of these 2-pair hands like ace 9 or ace 6, and much more likely that he has one of these crappy gut shots that didn't hit. So Doug should be checking at a very high frequency. And now facing a range which should be very, very polarized, Daniel can basically opt for betting a small size into it at a high frequency, getting him to fold a whole bunch of those crappy gut shots, and only continuing with his good hands. There isn't really much incentive to bet large into a polarized range because he'll just end up folding out Doug's garbage and then value owning himself against, you know, his good hands that check raised. But 8-8 here, just favoring a check back, and actually if you look at the EVs here, betting the 8-8 is a fairly large mistake, like negative 1.5 blinds or so compared to just checking back. Presumably because it doesn't benefit that much from Doug folding out all of his crappy gut shots. like it, you only need to dodge, you know, like a 4-outer or something on the river. And also if an 8 comes on the river, that's like really good. If Doug happened to check raise something like 10-7, now you have a full house against a straight scenario, so you're not really that interested in folding out some of those gut shots. But he does bet. And, you know, if Doug does happen to have the sliver of the Jack-4 suited, obviously he's calling with his flush draw. And then once a Jack hits on the river, it's an easy just check. And then if Daniel had 8-8, you know, some weak pair, it'd probably just be a check back, right? Okay, so it's a bit odd kind of looking at that turn play when the flop ranges are messed up from using different sizings. So we'll have a look at a different sim to see how things changes and see if we can learn something. Right, so here's a different sim where we simplified this flop strategy to just include the very small check raise sizing that Doug ends up using. And we'll see what implication that has on the strategy here. So range check on the flop at a position, and Daniel has the range c-bet again. And we can see with the small check raise sizing, solver opts for a much more merged range compared to the polarized range that we were seeing before, right? So lots of different pairs of aces getting mixed into the range here. You know, ace-8s, ace-7s, the whole thing. And even like middle pairs like king-9 with backdoors, high frequency check raise, you know, some random weak pairs, 6-4, that kind of thing. And, you know, bluff raising range is similar to before. It includes at a high frequency a lot of these backdoor flush draws with gut shots, that kind of thing, open-ended straight draws. But, you know, Jack-4 of clubs gets in there at a bit higher frequency this time. So, as well as things like, you know, random double overcards to the 9s, right? Typically merged ranges are going to be a lot more balanced, mixing in low frequency with a lot of different things to stay balanced. So Doug does check raise with the Jack-4 to this very small sizing. And Daniel should obviously continue with the ace-8. And he needs to find continues with, you know, 79% of his hands here. So whether this is like a good strategy choice for Doug depends on, I guess, what you think of the opponent in an exploitative manner, whether they're going to be actually continuing this many hands. You know, is Daniel going to be continuing with Queen-8 offsuit in this position? I really don't know, but perhaps Doug has a better idea if he's taking this as an exploit or whether it's just a simple mistake. One thing that you can do with solvers is you can look at how Doug's EV changed by taking a non-optimal sizing here. You can see that his EV with this sizing is 1.76, whereas before it was 1.77. So roughly an EV change of, you know, like 0.6% of the pot or something like that, which these, you know, EV hits you can take if you are confident that versus your weird line, your opponent isn't going to be playing well. But you might not want to get into the habit of taking, you know, 1% of the pot EV hits, because that can amount to, you know, versus a good opponent, you know, a loss of like 5 big blinds per 100 in the long run. But anyways, we get the raise on the flop, call, turn comes ace of clubs. And since we're raising a merge range, this card isn't as bad for Doug as it was previously, since our range now contains, you know, a lot of this ace-x, a lot more of these ace-x, it seems. And with Jack-4 of clubs, actually, Doug should be following through with a barrel at a fairly high frequency. So he doesn't have to just check range here. He can continue barreling with a lot of his trips here, and then mix in with his bluffs, you know, his turned flush draws, keep on bluffing with some of these open-ended straight draws and gut shots, and you got a pretty good range there still. But he does check this time. And we can see on the turn that if we look at the EVs for 8-8, it's still checking back, at equilibrium for the most part. But if we look at the EVs of the bet, it's actually roughly even between checking and stabbing here. So it's roughly indifferent. Basically against Doug's merged range now, he's at much lower risk of getting check raised off this hand. In the previous sim, Doug should be folding out a lot of his garbage on the turn to a check bet line, but with his good range, still check raising. But with his merge range, Doug is liable to be check calling the turn with, a lot of his ace-x, some 9x, maybe some weak pairs like 6x, so Daniel can probe here on the turn and then check back the river, and that really isn't a terrible scenario for him, even if he does value own himself. So we can see that Daniel's stab here is a lot better in this simulation here, based on the changing flop ranges. And versus the stab here, Doug should obviously be continuing here with his flush draw, but he can actually mix in some double check raise bluffs here on the turn if he likes with his flush draws. And then on the river, we get the call, jack of spades, and pretty easy check back 8-8 for Daniel here, and just taking the showdown value. River value should just be going for big sizing with, overbet sizing with his trips here after probing the turn small. And with his jack X, he can go for a smaller sizing, like 75% of the pot, and that's what the equilibrium likes, it seems. All right, so that's been another Polk versus Negreanu hand, with Polk taking this non-optimal check raise sizing on the A-side board, which the equilibrium isn't very fond of. While Daniel responds fairly well to its 8-8 here. Not really a difficult hand to play here, though his turn stab bet can be said to be like a low frequency play at the GTO solution. And neither player can be really be said to be making like a glaring error according to the GTO solution, so long as the strategies they're using are relatively balanced. Alright, so I'm going to continue on with a few more of these videos. Don't forget to lightly tap that like and subscribe button. Thank you.